Realm of Ruins. Chapter 3. Borys. Borys watched his brother in silence, the tension from their conversation still lingering like a storm cloud. The mist hung thick in the air, wrapping around them, muffling the sounds of the camp. Corey's words echoed in his mind, a familiar clash between responsibility and rebellion. It was a dance they'd repeated countless times, and Borys couldn't shake the heavy feeling in his chest. But before he could say anything more, the quiet was shattered by the thunderous sound of hooves tearing through the muddy ground. Borys turned, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. The camp stirred around him as a rider emerged from the fog, the sunlight glinting off polished bronze armor. The horse, a powerful beast, with a coat as dark as midnight, panted heavily, steam rising from its flared nostrils. The rider sat tall and commanding, every inch a royal figure. His armor was a striking bronze, crafted with meticulous detail. The breastplate bore the crest of the capital, a lion roaring above crossed swords, a symbol of power and dominion. The helmet was the most impressive piece, an imposing design that wrapped around the rider's head. The curved crest ridged like the back of some ancient beast. The cheek guards were decorated, polished, so finely they almost shone like gold. The ridges along the helmet were etched with small, precise patterns, a testament to the skill of the craftsman who had forged it. Borys narrowed his eyes, recognizing the significance. A royal messenger. Such messengers did not ride out lightly or without great cause. Around them, soldiers paused in their duties, watching the rider with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Corey, ever one to break the silence, muttered, "Looks like someone dragged all of the capital's pomp into our mud." Borys shot his brother a glare, his jaw tightening with irritation. Loyalty flared hot in his chest, an instinctive defense of the king they served. But before he could respond, the flap of their father's tent burst open. Beorn stepped out, his presence as commanding as ever, the fur of his black bear pelt brushing against his broad shoulders. His eyes, sharp and calculating, took in the rider in an instant. The messenger dismounted with practiced ease, his armor clinking softly as he landed. He strode forward with purpose, bowing deeply to Beorn before straightening. His voice, clear and authoritative, carried across the camp. "Lord Beorn of House Balon," he announced, "I come bearing a message from His Majesty, King Laenor, the Lion." Beorn's expression remained impassive, but Borys noticed the tightening of his father's jaw, the way his hand flexed slightly at his side. "Speak then," Beorn commanded, his voice steady. The messenger reached into a leather satchel at his hip and produced a scroll sealed with the royal insignia. He held it out, and Beorn stepped forward, breaking the seal with a practiced motion. He unrolled the parchment, his eyes scanning the words quickly. Borys felt the tension coil tighter in his gut as he watched his father read. Corey, for once, had fallen silent, his own gaze fixed on Beorn. Finally, Beorn raised his head, his voice carrying an edge of something Borys couldn't quite place. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. "The king," Beorn began, his voice steady but low, "invites us to the royal wedding." Borys felt a surge of pride, but Corey exchanged a look with him, skepticism written across his face. Corey's lip curled in that familiar, defiant smirk. "Well, father," he drawled, "it seems our king still remembers us after all." Borys bristled, his loyalty flaring up. "Show some respect, Corey," he snapped. "This is an invitation from our king. We should be grateful for the honor." Corey's eyes rolled, his smirk deepening. Grateful are we, while we rot here fighting his damned war. Perhaps you'd like to send him our thanks in blood and broken bodies. Before the tension could escalate, the royal messenger cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the fray. There is one more message from His Majesty, he said, his tone formal and deliberate. The king was hoping for a hunt in the Wolfswood before the wedding. Borys watched his father closely. Beorn's face betrayed little, but Borys saw the way his father's eyes sharpened, the way his posture stiffened, as if bracing for some unseen blow. The mention of the Wolfswood was more than just an invitation. It carried a hidden weight, a meaning only Beorn seemed to understand. Beorn wasted no time. His voice was commanding, leaving no room for doubt or delay. "Borys Corey," he said, "pack your things. Be ready to leave by noon. We ride for the capital." Borys nodded instantly, the sense of duty coursing through him. There was no question, no hesitation in his mind. Corey, however, hesitated, his defiance flickering before he reluctantly nodded. Beorn then turned to a nearby guard. "Gather Lord Oswald, Harrold, and Oric at the command tent," he ordered. "We have much to discuss." As the news spread through the camp, a ripple of unease moved among the soldiers. Men exchanged wary glances, whispers of the king's wedding passing from tent to tent. The idea of a grand celebration in the capital felt like an insult, a slap in the face to those who had given everything to hold the line. Borys heard snippets of conversation as he and Corey made their way toward their tents. "A fucking wedding," one soldier muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. "While we're out here freezing our arse off. Typical." "Do you know who he's marrying?" another asked, leaning in as if sharing a dangerous secret. "Lord Flores' daughter, they say. House Flores controls the grain supply. Smart match, that." "Smart or not, it won't feed us here," the first soldier grumbled, pulling his cloak tighter around his shoulders. "I'd trade 1,000 royal banquets for a warm fire and a full belly." Borys' jaw clenched at the murmurs, but he forced himself to keep walking. He understood their bitterness, but he couldn't allow it to infect his own loyalty. The king's decisions were not for common soldiers to question. His duty was to serve, to believe in the larger vision, even if the cost was steep. Corey, however, seemed more than willing to speak the doubts aloud. As they reached their tents, he shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Lord Flores' daughter," he said, echoing the rumor. "Of course, the king marries into the wealthiest, most resource-rich house in the kingdom. All for unity, I'm sure." Borys shot him a warning look. "The king is strengthening alliances," he said firmly. "House Flores' control over the food supply is crucial. This marriage secures stability for the entire realm." Corey stopped packing for a moment, his gaze hard. "Stability? You mean it keeps us fed just enough to keep fighting, while they dine in luxury?" He threw a bundle of clothes into his satchel, frustration etched into his features. "Tell me, Borys, how many more strategic marriages will it take before we're bled dry?" Borys sighed, his movement slowing. "I know it feels unfair," he admitted. "But the king sees the bigger picture. We're soldiers, Corey. We fight so that the realm can have a future, so that there can be peace." Corey dropped onto his cot, his shoulders slumping. "And what about us?" he asked, his voice quieter. "When do we get to live?" Borys's heart twisted at the vulnerability in his brother's voice. He sat down beside Corey, his expression softening. "We live when this is over," he said. "We fight now, so that one day our children won't have to." Corey looked at him, a faint, tired smile playing on his lips, "You're too good for this world, brother," he said, shaking his head. "Carrying all this will kill you one day." Borys managed a small smile in return. "Maybe," he replied, "but until then, I'll do what I must." They sat in silence for a moment, the bond between them stronger than their differences. Corey reached out and punched Borys lightly on the shoulder, his grin widening. "Come on then," he said. "If we're going to the capital, I hope there's enough wine to make this trip bearable." Borys shook his head, a soft laugh escaping his lips. For a brief moment, they were just two brothers preparing for the journey ahead, bound together by blood, duty, and something deeper. Thank you for tuning in to Realm of Ruins. Don't forget to like and follow to keep the story going.